So today I'll be discussing about measles, mumps and rubella, one of the important topics in infectious diseases. It is more priorly important pediatric wise, but even the more common cases are found in adult. So starting with measles. Measles, or it is also known as rubeola, and I'm giving you a bit of homework. Why is it known as rubeola? Measles or rubeola is a highly contagious acute respiratory disease. Before the widespread use of measles vaccine, it was estimated that measles caused more than 2 million deaths worldwide each year. In some areas of the world, it remains a serious threat to the children. Coming to a brief discussion of epidemiology regarding measles. Measles has a worldwide distribution. Historically saying, measles caused universal infection in childhood in the United States, with more than 90% of children acquiring the infection before 15 years of age. Morbidity and mortality associated with measles decreased prior to the introduction of the vaccine as a result of improvement in healthcare and nutrition. However, the incidence declined dramatically following the introduction of the measles vaccine in 1963. The attack rate fell from 313 cases per 1 lakh population in 1956 to 1960 period to 1.3 cases per 1 lakh in 1982 to 1988. Approximately 3 lakh 50,000 childhood deaths occur globally due to measles every year, out of which 80,000 are accounted by India. Coming to etiology, it is a single-stranded lipid-enveloped RNA virus belonging to the family Paramyxoviridae and genus Morbillivirus. Measles was originally a zoonotic infection. Humans are the only natural host of this virus. Measles virus is considered to be an antigenetically monotypic virus, that is, the surface proteins responsible for inducing protective immunity have retained their antigenic structure. So, this is the meaning. Antigenetically monotypic is the surface proteins responsible for inducing protective immunity. They have retained the virus's antigenic structure. Coming to the transmission, portal of entry is via respiratory tract or conjunctiva, via large droplet or small droplet aerosols. And the incubation period of this virus is 6 to 19 days to the onset of rash. Coming to pathology, necrosis of the respiratory tract. This virus enters via respiratory tract or conjunctiva. After that, it causes a necrosis of the respiratory tract epithelium and an accompanying lymphocytic infiltrate resultant. Small vessel vasculitis on the skin is also caused and on the oral mucous membrane. Histology of the rash and exanthem reveals intracellular edema and disc keratosis associated with formation of epidermal syncytial giant cells with up to 26 nuclei. Fusion of these infected cells results in multinucleated giant cells. It is known as the Warthin-Finkelday giant cells. The Warthin-Finkelday giant cells, which is the pathognomonic, that is histologically, for measles, with up to 100 nuclei and intracytoplasmic and intranuclear inclusions. Coming to pathology, previously I discussed about pathogenesis. Measles can be divided into 4 phases depending upon the presentation of the symptoms. So it is initially incubation period, second is prodromal illness, then exanthematous phase, then comes the recovery phase. So measles consists of 4 phases: incubation period, prodromal illness, exanthematous phase, and recovery phase. So in incubation period, the virus migrates So in incubation period, virus migrates into the virus migrates into the respiratory epithelium, and primary viremia ensues, causing the dissemination of virus to reticuloendothelial system. Secondary viremia spreads virus to the body surfaces. This ensures the next phase of the illness, that is prodromal illness. Prodromal illness, here epithelial necrosis and giant cell formation is seen. In this, the important part is viral shedding begins in this phase. Exanthematous phase, with onset of the rash, the antibody production begins in the body and viral replication and symptoms begin to subside, which is nothing but the recovery phase. Coming to the clinical manifestations of this viral illness, high fever is seen, that is more than 101 degree Fahrenheit, ananthem, cough, coryza, conjunctivitis, and prominent exanthem. Important part is the Koplik spots or the ananthem, the second one which symptom I have told you, represents the ananthem and is the pathognomonic sign of measles. This is very important, appearing 1 to 4 days prior to the onset of the rash. They first appear as discrete red lesions with bluish white spots in the center on the inner aspects of the cheeks at the level of the premolars. It also involves the lips, hard palate, and gingiva. So, it is seen as discrete red lesions with bluish white spots in the center on the inner aspects of the cheeks. This is the diagrammatic representation. You can see on the cheeks, it's not exactly bluish, but these are the Koplik spots on the buccal mucosa during the 3rd day of the rash. This is a child presenting with the rash, typical rash. It starts on the face and then spreads to the torso, then the back and the extremities. So this picture shows the typical red blotchy pattern, maculopapular rash of measles. Coming to the diagnosis of the measles, on clinical basis, that is via symptoms, we diagnose it by Koplik spots as they appear early and they are pathognomonic. So it is the ananthem phase before the appearance of the rash. The Center for Disease Control case definition for measles requires 3 points: a generalized maculopapular rash of at least 3 days duration, fever of at least 38.3 degrees centigrade or 101 degree Fahrenheit, cough, coryza or conjunctivitis. So these are the 3 main points. And the other methods of diagnosis is by serology, that is detection of virus specific IgM, immunoglobulin M, in a single specimen of serum or oral fluid is considered diagnostic of acute infection. This is done by enzyme immunoassay. And then we can also isolate the virus in cell culture from respiratory secretions, nasopharyngeal or conjunctival swabs, blood or urine. Direct detection of giant cells in respiratory secretions, urine or tissue obtained by biopsy is also done. So what are the differential diagnoses? How do you differentiate diagnosis for measles? It's on the basis of the rash. So what are the other causes of maculopapular rash in people? So it is rubella, Kawasaki disease, infectious mononucleosis, roseola, scarlet fever, Rocky Mountain spotted fever, enterovirus or adenovirus infection, drug sensitivity or drug eruptions. So what is the treatment for this measles virus? There is no specific antiviral therapy. The supportive measures are such as hydration and antipyretic agents. Vitamin A is considered in measles. WHO recommends administration of once daily dose of 2 lakh international units of vitamin A for 2 consecutive days to all children with measles who are more than 12 months of age. So you can divide it into this 3 phases where you can give vitamin A based on doses and the age. So children who are more than 12 months of age, you give 2 lakh international units. Children who are between 6 to 12 months of age, you give 1 lakh international units per day. And children less than 6 months old, you give 50,000 international units. That is for 2 consecutive days. The same dose, the dosage is different. Okay. Next comes the complications. Complications involve pneumonia, croup, tracheitis and bronchiolitis, acute otitis media, febrile seizure. So pneumonia, it may manifest as giant cell pneumonia caused directly by the viral infection or as superimposed bacterial infection. The most common bacterial pathogens, you must have read it in your microbiology: Streptococcus pneumoniae, Haemophilus influenzae, and Staphylococcus aureus. Febrile seizures occurs in less than 3% of children with measles. encephalitis following measles is a long associated complication. It's also seen, but often with an unfavorable outcome. A severe form of measles rarely seen now is hemorrhagic measles or black measles. It is manifested as hemorrhagic skin eruption and is often fatal. Others like keratitis, thrombocytopenia, and myocarditis are rare complications. Measles during pregnancy is associated with high rate of maternal morbidity, fetal wastage, and stillbirths with and without congenital malformation in less than 3% of live born infants. How do you prevent? So this is the most important part. Measles vaccine is the separate content. Only simply measles vaccine is a live attenuated vaccine. Indian vaccines are usually formulated from the Edmonston Zagreb virus strain grown on human diploid cells. The dose is 0.5 ml subcutaneous or intramuscular, preferably over upper arm or anterolateral aspect of thigh. So the approximate age given is 9 months. Post-exposure is administration within 2 days. This measles vaccine may be given with all vaccines except BCG vaccine. So it is available as monovalent preparation, but we usually combine with the measles rubella or measles mumps rubella varicella or measles mumps rubella vaccine, the last of which, the measles mumps rubella, is recommended form in most circumstances. So the current recommendations include the MMR vaccine. The dosage is first dose at 12 to 15 months and followed by a second dose at 4 to 6 years of age. What are the adverse events from the MMR vaccine? It can include fever, usually 6 to 12 days following vaccination, rash in approximately 5% of vaccinated persons, and rarely transient thrombocytopenia. Excuse me. What about the post-exposure prophylaxis? Immunoglobulin is indicated for susceptible household contacts of measles patients, especially infants younger than 6 months of age, pregnant women, and immunocompromised persons. What about an immunocompetent children? They can also receive. Immunocompetent children should receive 0.25 ml per kg of immunoglobulin intramuscularly, and immunocompromised children should receive 0.5 ml per kg. That is, maximum dose in both cases is you can go up to 15 ml per kg. The vaccine is effective in prevention or modification of measles if given within 72 hours of exposure. Coming to rubella. The etiology of rubella. Rubella is also known as German measles or third day measles. You can tell me why, refer and tell me later on. It's a mild, often exanthematous disease of infants and children that is typically more severe and associated with more complication in adults. Its major clinical significance is transplacental infection and fetal damage as a part of the congenital rubella syndrome. Rubella virus is a member of the family Togaviridae and is the only species of the genus Rubivirus. It is a single-stranded RNA virus. You have to note the point that this measles, mumps, and rubella all are RNA viruses. It is a single-stranded RNA virus with a lipid envelope and 3 structural proteins. The virus is sensitive to heat, ultraviolet light, and extremes of pH, but is relatively stable at cold temperatures. Here also humans are the only host. Epidemiology, so I'll brief it up. In the pre-vaccine era, rubella appeared to occur in major epidemics every 6 to 9 years, with smaller peaks interspersed over 3 to 4 years, and was most common in preschool age and school age children. During the rubella epidemic of 1964 to 65 period, there were an estimated 12.5 million cases of rubella associated with 2,000 cases of encephalitis, more than 13,000 abortions or perinatal deaths, and 20,000 cases of the congenital rubella syndrome. Following the introduction of the rubella vaccine in 1969, the incidence of rubella fell 78% in 1976, and congenital rubella syndrome cases fell by 69%. So the Global Vaccine Action Plan, 2011 to 2020, calls for the elimination of rubella in 5 of the 6 World Health Organization regions by 2020. Coming to the clinical manifestation, so I have divided it into acquired rubella and the congenital rubella syndrome. Initially, I'll talk about acquired rubella following an incubation period. So the incubation period in acquired rubella is 14 to 21 days. Here, usually a prodrome is not seen, but a prodrome consists of low-grade fever, sore throat, red eyes, with or without eye pain, headache, malaise, anorexia, and lymphadenopathy begins. Suboccipital, postauricular, and anterior cervical lymph nodes are most prominent. So here, initially, lymph node involvement is the important point in the rubella. In children, the first manifestation of rubella is usually the rash. It begins on the face and neck as small, irregular pink macules that coalesce, that is group up, and it spreads centrifugally to involve the torso and extremities, where it tends to occur as discrete macules. About the time of onset of the rash, examination of the oropharynx may reveal tiny rose-colored lesions, which is known as Forsheimer spots. Tiny rose-colored lesions, that is known as Forsheimer spots or petechial hemorrhages on the soft palate. The duration, this is the pathognomonic feature of rubella. So the pathognomonic feature of measles is Koplik spots. The duration of the rash in rubella is generally 3 days, and it usually resolves without desquamation. Subclinical infections are common, and 25 to 40% of children may not have a rash. So this is the picture of a baby showing, an infant showing the typical rash of rubella. Coming to the congenital rubella syndrome, which is the important part. The most serious consequence of rubella virus infection can develop when a woman becomes infected during her pregnancy, particularly during the first trimester or the first 18 weeks. The resultant complications may include miscarriage, fetal death, premature delivery, or live birth with congenital defects. Infants infected with rubella in utero may have myriad physical defects, which most commonly are related to the eyes, ears, and heart. So when this constellation of severe birth defects, when all these organs like eyes, ears, and heart are involved, it is known as congenital rubella syndrome. In addition to permanent manifestations, there are a host of transient physical manifestations, including thrombocytopenia with purpura or petechiae. It involves dermal thing, that is dermal erythropoiesis, which is known as blueberry muffin syndrome. Retinal findings described as salt and pepper retinopathy are the most common ocular abnormality. So you have more important points in rubella, that is the myriad of symptoms. Constellation of symptoms is known as congenital rubella syndrome, the blueberry muffin syndrome, and the salt and pepper retinopathy. So I have tabulated the transient and permanent manifestations here in infants with congenital rubella syndrome. Transient, first we'll see about the permanent manifestations. It is hearing impairment or deafness. As I told you, the ear is involved. Congenital heart defects, that is like patent ductus arteriosus, pulmonary arterial stenosis. Eye defects, that is cataract, cloudy cornea, microphthalmos, pigmentary retinopathy, and congenital glaucoma, and microcephaly. And the other one is central nervous system sequelae, which is mental and motor delay and autism. The other transient manifestations are hepatosplenomegaly, interstitial pneumonitis, thrombocytopenia with purpura, as I discussed before, blueberry muffin syndrome, hemolytic anemia, there may be bony radiolucencies, IUGR, adenopathy, meningoencephalitis. So this is a picture where a baby is showing bilateral cataracts in infant with congenital rubella syndrome. This baby can also have microcephaly along with this. How do you diagnose? It's also the same like measles. It is immunoglobulin IgM enzyme immunosorbent assay. Leukopenia, while in blood investigation you can see leukopenia, neutropenia, and mild thrombocytopenia. IgM capture assay and RT-PCR chain reaction test or viral culture should be performed for the confirmation. What is the differential diagnosis? As I mentioned below, it is differentiated on the basis of the presentation of the rash, that is maculopapular rash, measles, adenoviruses, parvovirus B19 or erythema infectiosum, Epstein-Barr virus, enteroviruses, mycoplasma pneumoniae. What are the possible complications which are presented with rubella? It is mostly infrequent and not life-threatening, but if at all, post-infectious thrombocytopenia, arthritis, encephalitis, and progressive rubella panencephalitis. This is a rare complication of either it can occur in both acquired or congenital rubella syndrome. It has an onset and course similar to those of the subacute sclerosing panencephalitis associated with measles. Treatment for rubella. There is no specific therapy. Symptom-based treatment such as fever and arthralgia. Administration of immunoglobulin should be considered only if a pregnant woman who has been exposed to a person with rubella, and we do not consider termination of pregnancy under any circumstances. In such cases, IM intramuscular administration of 20 ml of immunoglobulin within the 72 hours of exposure may reduce but does not eliminate the risk of rubella. How do you prevent? So this is the same thing as I discussed before. The most effective method of preventing is through MR or MMR vaccination formulations. I have already discussed it before. So important point about the vaccinations, one dose of MMR vaccine induces seroconversion in more than 95% of persons of more than 1 year of age. So why do you give the second dose? Second dose is to protect children failing to seroconvert primarily against mumps. So the less commonly against rubella, ensuring double immune response. So that is why we give the 2 doses of MMR. The most commonly used vaccine globally is the RA27/3 virus strain. The recommendation for routine rubella vaccination schedules, as I told, first dose is at 12 to 15 months of age. Second dose is at 4 to 6 years. This is also important in your pediatric. It can be given as a 4 marks question. Target groups for rubella vaccine include children of more than 1 year of age, adolescents and adults without documented evidence of immunity, individuals in congregate settings, that is college students, military personnel, child care and healthcare workers, and susceptible women before and after pregnancy. I have given you a table differentiating between measles and rubella, so you can easily remember the points. Both are highly similar points, but there are some differences. Measles is highly contagious, whereas rubella is not as contagious as measles. Measles have symptoms lasting up to 10 days. In rubella, it lasts up to 5 days. Measles, there is a presence of prodromal stage. In rubella, there is no prodromal stage. Measles, there is incubation period is 1 to 2 weeks, whereas in rubella, it is 2 to 3 weeks. There is no lymph node swelling observed in measles, but there is typical. All lymph nodes are swollen. Lymph nodes are definitely swollen in rubella. High-grade fever in measles, that is more than 40 degrees centigrade, and low-grade fever, that is less than 38.3 degrees centigrade in rubella. Rashes are blotches with spots in measles, but in rubella, rashes fade fast. Measles, photophobia is present. Rubella, there is no photophobia. And Koplik spots are the pathognomonic feature of measles. Forsheimer spots are the pathognomonic feature of rubella. So coming to the final topic for today, that is mumps. It is an illness characterized by acute onset unilateral or bilateral tender self-limited swelling of the parotid or other salivary glands. So the salivary glands are involved in mumps. So it is acute onset unilateral or bilateral tender self-limited swelling of the parotid that lasts for at least 2 days and has no other apparent cause. Although no longer common in countries with extensive vaccination programs, mumps remains endemic in the rest of the world, warranting the continued vaccine protection. Coming to the etiology, mumps virus belongs to the family Paramyxoviridae and the genus Rubella virus. You must have read about it in microbiology. It is a single-stranded pleomorphic RNA virus encapsulated in a lipoprotein envelope and possessing the 7 structural proteins. The surface glycoproteins called hemagglutinin neuraminidase and fusion. These mediate absorption. Why I'm mentioning it? Because this mediates absorption of the virus to host cells and penetration of the virus into the cells, respectively. Both of these proteins stimulate production of protective antibodies in the body. Mumps virus exists as a single immunotype, and here also humans are the only natural host. Coming to epidemiology, I will give you a brief gist of it. In the pre-vaccine era, mumps occurred primarily in young children between the ages of 5 and 9 years and in epidemics about every 4 years. Mumps infection occurred more often in the winter and spring months. Excuse me. In 1968, just after the introduction of the mumps vaccine, 1,85,691 cases were reported in the United States. Following the recommendation for routine use of mumps vaccine in 1977, the incidence of mumps fell dramatically in young children and shifted instead to older children, adolescents, and the young adults. Outbreaks continue to occur in highly vaccinated populations as a result of vaccine failure and also because of the under-vaccination of susceptible persons. After the implementation of the 2-dose recommendation, that is MMR vaccine for measles control in 1989, the number of mumps cases has declined further. Mumps is spread from person to person by respiratory droplets. Virus appears in the saliva for up to 7 days to as long as 7 days after the onset of the parotid swelling. The period of maximum infectiousness is 1 to 2 days, before to 5 days after the onset of parotid swelling. So viral shedding before onset of symptoms and in asymptomatic infected individuals impairs efforts to contain the infection in a susceptible individual. The US Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, the American Academy of Pediatrics, and the Health Infection Control Practices Advisory Committee, so 3 committees, recommend an isolation period of 5 days after the onset of parotitis for patients with mumps in both community and healthcare settings. Coming to the pathology and pathogenesis of this virus. Mumps virus, as I told before, targets the salivary glands, along with that central nervous system, pancreas, testis, and these are the main important organs. Later on, to a lesser extent, it involves thyroid, ovaries, heart, kidney, liver, and joint synovium. Following infection, initial viral replication occurs in the epithelium of the upper respiratory tract. Infection spreads to the adjacent lymph nodes by the lymphatic drainage, and there viremia ensues, spreading the virus to targeted tissues. Mumps virus causes necrosis of the infected cells and is associated with lymphocytic inflammatory infiltrate. Salivary gland ducts are lined with necrotic epithelium and the interstitium is infiltrated with lymphocytes. This is the histology part. Swelling of tissue within the testis may result in focal ischemic infarct. This is also results in sterility. Cerebrospinal fluid frequently contains a mononuclear pleocytosis even in individuals without clinical signs of meningitis. So there need not be any meningitis also. The virus probably enters. How does the virus enter? The CSF. It enters through the choroid plexus or via transiting mononuclear cells during plasma viremia. Virus in the perilymph can result in infection of the cochlea and damage to the organ of Corti and the tectorial membrane, leading to transient or permanent deafness. Evidence of placental and intrauterine spread has been found in both early and late gestation. Mumps during the first trimester of pregnancy increases the risk of miscarriage, and there is no evidence that mumps during pregnancy increases the risk of premature delivery or birth defects. Clinical manifestations of mumps. Incubation period ranges from 12 to 25 days, but it is usually 16 to 18 days. Mumps virus may result in clinical presentation ranging from asymptomatic or non-specific symptoms to the typical illness associated with parotitis with or without complications involving several body systems. It ranges from asymptomatic to typical illness. The typical patient presents with a prodrome lasting about 1 to 2 days, which consists of fever, headache, vomiting, and achiness. Parotitis then appears and may be unilateral initially but becomes bilateral in approximately 70% of cases. Parotid gland is tender and parotitis may be preceded or accompanied by the ear pain on the ipsilateral side. Ingestion of sour or acidic foods or liquids may enhance pain in the parotid area, the typical symptom presented by the patient. As swelling progresses, the angle of the jaw is obscured and the ear lobe may be lifted upward and outward. As you can see in this picture, that is the imaginary line which we draw from above to below. And when the parotid gland swells, the ear lobe is lifted. That anatomical line is dividing. You can remember your own old anatomy. The parotid gland is divided into two parts. The opening of the Stenson duct may be red and edematous. We see in the inner portion of the buccal cavity. The parotid swelling peaks in approximately 3 days and then gradually subsides over 7 days. Fever and other systemic symptoms resolve in 3 to 5 days. A morbilliform rash, that is nothing but maculopapular, is rarely seen. Submandibular salivary glands may also be involved or may be enlarged without parotid swelling. So always remember, all the salivary glands are involved in mumps. Edema over the sternum as a result of lymphatic obstruction may also occur. This is a child with mumps showing bilateral parotid swelling. And this is a patient in his adolescent age showing the parotid swelling. That is, the first picture A shows the initial starting of mumps. And this is on the picture B shows the third day of the acute bilateral parotitis. Coming to diagnosis of mumps. Basis of history of exposure to mumps infection and appropriate incubation period and development of typical clinical findings we can diagnose. Confirmation of the presence of parotitis. It could be made with demonstration of elevated serum amylase value. And in blood, leukopenia with a relative lymphocytosis is seen. Isolation of the virus in cell culture, detection of viral antigen by direct immunofluorescence, or identification of nucleic acid by RT-PCR, reverse transcriptase polymerase chain reaction. The virus can also be isolated from upper respiratory tract secretions, CSF, or urine during the acute illness phase. A significant increase in serum mumps Ig immunoglobulin G antibody between acute and convalescent serum specimens as detected by complement fixation, neutralization hemagglutination, or enzyme immunoassay tests establishes the diagnosis. This you must have read it in your microbiology. Differential diagnosis. Viruses, here we don't differentiate it based on rash. Here we differential diagnosis the other causes of parotitis, the swelling of parotid gland. So viruses that cause parotitis include parainfluenza 1 and parainfluenza 3 viruses, influenza A virus, cytomegalovirus, Epstein-Barr virus, enteroviruses, lymphocytic choriomeningitis virus, and HIV. Purulent parotitis, that is usually caused by Staphylococcus aureus, is unilateral. It is extremely tender and is associated with an elevated blood cell count. And main finding, you can involve purulent drainage from the Stenson duct. What do you see in mumps? You see the redness of the Stenson duct. Submandibular or anterior cervical adenitis from a variety of pathogens may also be confused with parotitis. Other non-infectious causes of parotid swelling include obstruction of Stenson duct, collagen vascular diseases such as Sjogren's syndrome, SLE, systemic lupus erythematosus, and tumor. What are the possible complications? Common complications are meningitis with or without encephalitis and gonadal involvement resulting in orchiditis or nephritis. Uncommon complications include conjunctivitis, optic neuritis, pneumonia, nephritis, pancreatitis, thyroiditis, and thrombocytopenia. This is based on the organs involved. So coming to the treatment, there is no specific antiviral therapy available for mumps. Management should be aimed at reducing the pain associated with meningitis or orchitis and maintaining adequate hydration. Antipyretics may be given for fever. So prognosis of mumps is nearly always excellent, even when the disease is complicated by encephalitis, although fatal cases may occur, and myocarditis has also been reported. Prevention, as I told before, immunization with live mumps vaccine is a primary mode of prevention. It is given as a part of the, we combine it, MMR 2-dose vaccine schedule. Again, I'm repeating it. At 12 to 15 months of age is the first dose, 4 to 6 years of age for the second dose. If not given at 4 to 6 years, the second dose should be given before children enter puberty. As a live virus vaccine, MMR should not be, these are a few points about the vaccination. As a live virus vaccine, MMR should not be administered to pregnant women or to severely immunodeficient or immunosuppressed individuals. HIV patients who are not severely immunocompromised may receive the vaccine because the risk for severe infection with mumps outweighs the risk for serious reaction to the vaccine. Adverse reactions to mumps virus vaccine are rare. Parotitis and orchitis have been reported rarely. In 2005, the quadrivalent measles, mumps, rubella, and varicella vaccine was made available. However, in 2010, studies showed a greater risk of febrile seizures in children to 12 to 13 months of age, 5 to 12 days following administration of the vaccine. There is no increased risk of seizures in children receiving the first dose of MMRV at older than 48 months of age. As a result, the American Academy of Pediatrics currently recommends either MMR vaccine and separate varicella vaccine, or the MMRV vaccine in children through 47 months of age. After 48 months of age, the MMRV is generally not preferred. After the 48 months, it's preferred.